All right, let's go to the United States. The State of the Union address, all the usual staged theatre. You know, it's all made for television. People that get a mention in the president's remarks stand up and they get clapped by the chamber. There was a sense when you listen to the president that he really is marking himself out, whether the Democrats will accept it or not, for a second term. Give us your take.
Well, I think that's right, Peter. This was Joe Biden's election campaign launch for 2024. He only made one obvious mistake, calling Chuck Schumer the minority leader when he's the majority leader. And of course, Biden has got us now where we think only one mistake in a speech that you read on a teleprompter is outstanding. There was one nutty line where he said no leader in the world would want to swap his position with Xi Jinping. God alone knows what that means. It's completely baffling. But generally, his pitch is, in my view, consists of four elements: green protectionism, welfare populism, more money for every welfare program you could possibly imagine, and protection on spurious green grounds for every American industry you could possibly imagine. And then he did well, I thought, in handling police reform. He embraced and loved the police while saying that they must be held accountable when they do the wrong thing. Well, actually, that's why the Democrats chose Biden in the first place, because he doesn't go out of his way to offend mainstream Americans. And then, but he did a little bit of song and dance on abortion rights and LGBTQ stuff. Almost nothing about foreign affairs. I would say just a couple of pro forma paragraphs denouncing Vladimir Putin right at the end, and a couple of pretty weaselly paragraphs about China. So that's his pitch. He's going to be a domestic, but quite feisty. He even had a bit of back and forth with Republicans in the Congress. He was in the moment. You know, I would say it's the best speech he's delivered for some years. He's set a very low standard hitherto, but you know, by Biden's standards, I thought that was a pretty good performance.
I know it's a ridiculous game to speculate is he going to run, because he's not going to tell us now, even if he's not. I mean, that would make him a pretty extraordinary lame duck president for an exaggerated period of time. But chance your arm, do you think he will run?
It looks like it. I mean, you know, politicians' egos are endless. He's brilliantly chosen Kamala Harris as his vice president because no one wants her as president. So there's no clamour for the vice president to take over. The Democratic Party has just rearranged the schedule of primaries so that South Carolina goes first. When you remember in the last presidential cycle, South Carolina saved Biden. He did very, very poorly in the early primaries, but he had strong support among black Democrat voters, and South Carolina put him back in the business, kind of knocked out Pete Buttigieg and made it a Bernie Sanders versus Joe Biden contest. And compared to Bernie Sanders, he looks like, he looks like Winston Churchill or something. So it all, and no other Democrat is hinting that they're going to enter the race, which means they're not fundraising, they're not forming political action committees. And at the moment, although I think Trump hopefully is gone, nonetheless, at the moment, Trump is still ahead in the Republican polls. So, dear God in heaven, Peter, this poor benighted planet of ours could see another Biden-Trump contest in 2024. What have we done to deserve that? Surely we get 1,000 years off purgatory if we have to live through that.
I don't know that I'm up for that, Greg. I might retire before then. Give us your take on this talk that will end up with a next-gen British submarine with a US combat system rather than something that comes out of the Virginia class. What can you tell us about these British submarines, and how likely is all of this?
Look, I think it is quite likely, although nobody knows for sure. The idea is that we'd get a British sub because they're smaller than the Virginia. The Virginia, the argument is too big for us to operate. And now that the Chinese are very likely to end up with bases in the South Pacific, it's not so important that we get to the South China Sea, but that rather that we can operate in our own waters. So range is not as important. However, this is a very disturbing story. The Brits are nowhere near designing the next generation of their attack subs, and they're going to build their guided missile subs first. So nuclear subnations, they have attack subs, which do the normal naval things, and they have huge, stealthy, quiet missile subs where they have their actual nuclear weapons. and they stay deep underwater in unknown locations. So they've got to build a whole new generation of the missile subs first, and then they get round to designing a whole new sub for their next generation of attack sub. But we are then going to integrate an American combat system into it, because that's the pride of our Navy, having the American combat system. The Brits will presumably want to keep on with their combat system. And the talk is the Americans might even build the reactor for us. Now, as sure as God made little green apples, Peter, that means there is no nuclear sub coming to this country before, and we're going to build it in Adelaide. So that puts it at about 2045, I reckon, before you could conceivably get your first nuclear-powered sub. And in that case, the Collins will wear out. I mean, the first one will be finished. It gets a 10-year life of type extension and is supposed to retire forever in 2038. So are we really going to do a second life of type extension on the Collins? I've always argued that we need another conventional submarine in the interim. If we'd stuck with Tony Abbott's Japanese subs made in Japan, we'd be only a couple of years away from getting our first one. And also, I think, oddly enough, this will suit all governments if we go down this weird British route, because they won't have to spend $1 on it for years and years and years. It's not even going to be designed until the 2030s. Now, maybe the government will have a fabulous, surprise for us in March, and all these worries will disappear. But I don't see how we can get a nuclear sub any time before the 2040s. We might lease a training boat from the Americans or something, but we're likely to have no subs.
We're not. We're not going to get anything if we keep Adelaide in the mix, as we heard from the Defence Minister, Richard Marles, today. But you resisted very, very politely there to tell them a great big fat "I told you so," because you've been saying pretty much exactly that for some time.